Hi friends, I hope you have watched the part 1 video of Introduction to Agile. So I am proceeding on with the part 2. All those who have not watched part 1, I would request you to watch part 1 and then probably watch this video. So the agenda for the day is two topics called the Scrum Framework, the Sprint Review and Retrospection. If you look into the concept of a Scrum Framework, there are three parts to it: the roles, the ceremonies, and the artifacts. There are three roles basically called the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the team. The ceremonies are sprint planning, sprint review, sprint retrospection, and daily Scrum meeting. The artifacts are product backlog, sprint backlog, and burn down charts. So we start with the roles, namely the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the team. The product owner. So who is called a product owner? A product owner basically defines the features of the product. He will decide on the release date and the content. He will be responsibility for the profitability, which is called the ROI, the return on investment. He will prioritize the features according to the market value. He will adjust the features and priorities for every iteration, and he has the capacity to accept or reject the work results. He is the product owner, the PO. The next is called the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is similar to a project manager in the traditional project. But the role the Scrum Master plays is entirely different from a project manager. A Scrum Master is a servant leader where he will represent the management to the project. He will be responsible for enacting the Scrum values and practices. He will be responsible for removing any kind of impediments and obstacles that might come in the way of the execution of the project. He will make sure that the team is fully functional and productive. He will enable close cooperation across all roles and functions, and he will also shield the team from external interferences. The next is the team. The team typically consists of about 5 to 9 people. The team needs to be cross-functional in the sense that the team needs to consist of programmers, testers, designers, etc. The members should be full-time. There may be slight exceptions where a database administrator could work part-time, else all members need to be employed full-time in the project, and only then they will be comprising the team. So the team needs to be self-organizing. So ideally no titles, but rarely a possibility. So when I say self-organizing, it means that no external force is required to motivate the team. So all the members of the team share equal responsibility and then are self-motivated. The membership should change only between sprints. So by membership, I mean if there are 5 people in a team, one person will enact as the Scrum Master, one person can be a designer, 2 people can be coders, and one could be a tester. So do not change that role during the sprint. The membership can only change once the sprint is completed successfully and before you proceed on to the next sprint. Now, coming to the ceremonies, namely the sprint planning, review, retrospective, and daily Scrum meeting. If you look into the sprint planning meeting, the sprint planning meeting, as the term indicates, it's a planning meeting which needs to be organized and people walking into the meeting needs to do some kind of homework before you go for the meeting. So before you go for the meeting, you decide on the team capacity, the product backlog, the business conditions, the current product, the technology, and so on. During the sprint planning meeting, you have two things. One is planning, the other one is called prioritization. So with respect to planning, you decide how to achieve the goal. Then you create a sprint backlog that is a subset of the product backlog. Then you estimate the sprint backlog in hours. Then you go for prioritization. The sprint prioritization basically analyzes and evaluates the product backlog. Then you select the sprint goal. So the output of the sprint planning meeting is the sprint goals and the sprint backlog. So when you look at sprint planning, the team selects items from the product backlog they can commit to completing. Then the sprint backlog is created. The sprint backlog basically deals with tasks that are identified and estimated, and that might run somewhere between 1 and 16 hours. Then collaboratively it is performed. It is not done alone by the Scrum Master. Then you consider what is called the high level design. So that is the basic concept behind a sprint planning. Then you have something called the daily scrum, otherwise called the stand-up meeting. This meeting needs to be done daily. The duration cannot exceed 15 minutes. The daily scrum is called a stand-up meeting because you need not sit. You can stand and talk. And the daily scrum meeting basically starts with the start of the day. This meeting is not for problem solving. The entire world is invited, meaning whoever is the interested parties could take part in the meeting, but only they can be observers. So team members, the Scrum Master, the PO, and only these three people could talk and others will be observers. So helps avoid other unnecessary meetings. So by the start of the day, every day you have a quick 15-minute stand-up meeting. So what do you do in that stand-up meeting? You answer three questions. What did you do yesterday? What will you do today? Is anything in your way? So kindly note the answers for these three questions are not statuses for the Scrum Master. Instead, they will be commitments in front of peers. So that is very, very important. This is not a meeting to check your status. Yeah, because everybody in the team are at the same peer level. Each one of you in the team have equal responsibility, and you should always note that this is not a status check meeting. Yeah, so these are kind of commitments in front of your peer team, and so we need to probably get answers for these three questions in the daily Scrum meeting. So if you look into the sprint review almost probably resembles a project review that might be happening in your final year of the BTech. So where the team will present what is accomplished during the sprint, and typically it should be in the form of a demo. So as far as possible, no slides should be used. It could be an informal presentation, and it's a 2-hour preparation time rule. The whole team participates and the entire world is invited. So when I say invite the world, so whoever is interested or would be interested in your product are welcome for the sprint review. Then you call something the sprint retrospective. This happens immediately after the sprint review meeting. So this retrospective is basically to have a periodic look at what is and what is not working. This retrospective will happen sometime between 15 to 30 minutes, and definitely it should be done after every sprint, after the sprint review. So here also the entire team will participate, including the Scrum Master, the PO, and the team. If possible, the customers and others could be invited. It is not mandatory. But Scrum Master, PO, and the team definitely needs to be available for the sprint retrospective. So in the sprint retrospective, there are only three things. The whole team will gather and discuss what they would like to start doing, stop doing, continue doing. Now coming to the artifacts, namely the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the burn down charts. If you look into the product backlog, the product backlog basically is a set of requirements. So this lists all desired work on the project. So a product backlog, as the term indicates, contains all the requirements for the entire product. So it is almost like a big bucket. So it is prioritized by the PO, reprioritized at the start of each sprint. So this is an iterative process. So this is a sample product backlog that you could see, where there are certain backlog items and the estimates given. Then the sprint goal is a short statement of what the work will be focused on during the sprint. For example, you can say make the application run on SQL Server in addition to Oracle. Something like this could be a sprint goal. So when you want to manage the sprint backlog, individuals sign up for work of their own choosing. Work is never assigned, and the estimated work remaining is updated daily. So the sprint backlog is a subset of the product backlog. So before you start the sprint, high priority items from the product backlog are moved to the sprint backlog. Once you move high priority items from the product backlog into the sprint backlog, then obviously individuals in the team will sign up for their work, and you will never assign work. So obviously the team will be self-motivated to probably carry out their own work that they have chosen on their own. So that is the key advantage of going for this agile model. So any team member can add, delete, or change the sprint backlog. The work for the sprint will emerge. If the work is not clear, then what you do is you define a sprint backlog item with a larger amount of time, and later you can break it down into details. And you need to update the work remaining as more becomes known. That is possible. So this is how a sprint backlog looks like, where you have a set of tasks listed like code the UI, code the middle tier, test the middle tier, and so on. Then you have days of the week in the further columns like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So normally the industry is a 5-day week. So that is why Monday to Friday is listed here, and you have some numerical values like 8, 4, 8, and so on. And this is how a sprint backlog looks like. So this is what is called a sprint burn down chart, where you start plotting with basically the days on the x-axis and the hours on the y-axis, and then every day you plot things and then you join with a solid line and you get a chart, and this is what is called a sprint burn down chart. So for example, you say code the user interface, code the middle tier, test the middle tier, and write online help, and you have something like this, and you start plotting things, and then probably the Monday thing, if you add, comes to about 44 roughly. Tuesdays come to about 32. Then similarly Friday is 8, and that is how you plot things on the graph, where the x-axis shows the days of the week and the y-axis shows the number of hours to be consumed on any particular day. So when you look at scalability, the typical team size would be 7 plus or minus 2 people. So scalability comes from teams of teams. So basically, there are certain factors in scaling that you always need to address, like the type of application, the team size, the team dispersion, and the project duration. So the Scrum has been used on multiple 500 plus person projects, and that is the power of Scrum. So this is what is called scaling through the Scrum of Scrums. So from top to bottom, if you could see, we have scaled up. So this is again a Scrum of Scrums, again scaling up. So these are certain references which you could probably go through whenever you're free. So a list of the Scrum reading list. It continues again. And thank you. And this concludes the introduction to Agile Part 2. So further lectures will be uploaded soon. Thank you.